On the phone with me right now is my guest, Fernando Aguirre, also known by his internet alias Fer FAL. Fernando is the author of the book Surviving the Economic Collapse, as well as the author of the popular blog Surviving in Argentina, where he shares knowledge about how to survive an economic collapse based on his own firsthand experience during the sovereign debt crisis of Argentina and subsequent collapse in 2001. Fernando, welcome to the program, and thanks for being with me tonight.
Thanks, Chris. It's good to be here with you.
I started reading your stuff back in, I think it was early 2009. As you well know, here in the United States, we had the bursting of the housing bubble, yes, approximately in September of 2008. And I was just curious, how long have you been writing about survival, preparedness issues, and did the situation in the U.S. back during the time period I just mentioned, did that motivate you to kind of expand out to a bigger audience, write a book?
Well, I started writing after the collapse in Argentina in 2001, mostly in forums, participating in different forums and such. Starting later on, 2002, 2003, starting writing more lengthy articles. I noticed that there was a gap in terms of preparedness and survival for that sort of thing. Well, a lot of it was either wilderness survival oriented or very extreme, like a nuclear meltdown or nuclear or post-nuclear disaster type of survival.
Right.
And there was a bit of lack of knowledge on what it is that people do when something like that happens.
So, in other words, you were looking out at the scenarios that people were preparing for, and it was the less likely stuff rather than in the Western world, we have economies that are, crumbling all the time.
And the needs you have are very different. It's the guy that is preparing for a nuclear war and China invading or that sort of thing, he has a completely different set of parameters from the guy that is looking at being maybe unemployed for a period of time, dealing with social unrest or worse crime on a daily basis, like for years at a time. So it's a different type of knowledge that you need.
Now, Fernando, I have a lot of different types of people that listen to this program. So a lot of people are unfamiliar with this whole, survivalist thing.
Right.
They think that it's sort of a
crazy
something that crazy people do. But
you
it's
watch doomsday preppers and that sort of thing.
Well, in that case, most of those people are crazy, but it's really all about just being more self-sufficient, preparing not only for the big things, but the small things, like the things you just mentioned, unemployment, things like that, right?
Yeah, and sometimes when the word self-sufficient comes into play, people immediately think, I have to move to a ranch, I have to start growing my own food and such. For me, self-sufficient means being as independent as you can within the system. I don't think that escaping the system is a solution. Basically, if you do that, you're isolating yourself and you're reducing your options. If you understand better how things work, I think that's a greater advantage than just isolating yourself from society.
Okay, now you went through an economic collapse in Argentina. Let's talk a little bit about that. Where were you back in 2001, 2000 when all of that was, beginning to unfold? Where were you? What were you doing when you had the moment that you said that, things aren't going to ever be the same here? Things are really bad. I mean, was it a long, drawn-out process? Here in the U.S., we're kind of waiting for our own sovereign debt crisis. Was it something that mostly hit people in the face, like overnight, or was there, a gradual, slow decline?
It's a little bit of both. Many things. The more drastic changes are the ones that are going to be happening slowly, little by little. Then there's specific events that make you realize, that you're standing in a place that you never thought you would end up with. I was just starting with. I was in the university. I was just about to get married.
Oh, wow.
So, it was a pretty bad moment in terms of work and such, because unemployment was very high, about 25%. And, starting a new family and all that, it certainly wasn't easy, but you just roll with it, you get along, you make the best out of it.
Now, with the inflation issue, I haven't done a lot of reading on Argentina, although I should have. Did the inflation rate really skyrocket overnight? Was there...
Right, yeah, that would be one of the things that, surprised the people the most. Just going to the supermarket one day and seeing that all of a sudden things have double in price. Right now we're talking about the fiscal cliff in U.S., and you're seeing people talk about the possibility of milk doubling in price one day from another. Just within 24 hours, milk doubling in price. That's the kind of thing that throws a huge percentage of the population into poverty ground. When that sort of thing happens, it's not a lot of people can deal with all of a sudden having 25% inflation, 50% inflation. It really affects where you're standing in terms of your social status.
We're in Argentina. I'm assuming that a lot of people were really unprepared for when things really started to spiral out of control. Am I right?
Yeah, the thing is that in South America in general, people are, I will admit so much, people are a little bit more resilient because they're more used to things not working to some point. Just as an example, we're almost 2013 right now, right? And even after over 10 years of the economic collapse, things are still complicated in Argentina. And I'll give you a very good example. Right now, people spend more of their Christmas with their family and such. My friends and family in Argentina, they spend the last 3 or 4 days, including Christmas, without power, without water, and a mean temperature of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So imagine what Christmas must have been like. Spending it like that.
So things are still pretty bad over there. The government is still hopelessly corrupt. And
recently there was quite a bit of rioting and looting. I think it was last week, there was 3 days of rioting across the 40 major cities across Argentina. Looting. There was a few people that got killed. Pretty bad all around. But it's the kind of thing that we eventually learn to live with. And even though it's not normal in the rest of the world, in Argentina, it kind of is.
Yeah. Well, I know that you are a Ron Paul guy. I've been reading your blog for a while, here and there. So to me, that says that you probably pay attention to things over here in the U.S. What similarities do you see between the Argentina situation of the last decade and what is developing here in the United States?
Well, there's a degradation of society in general, and in spite of the differences, I think we're more similar than we like to admit sometimes. People, both in Argentina and in U.S., they get used to things they never thought they would. There's an increase in the amount of poverty in the population that is severely restricted and heading to a point by the government, trying to keep things nice and tidy, pretending it's not happening, trying to manipulate the numbers as much as they can. And when that's not even possible, they downright lie about things, about unemployment and that sort of thing. So there's in terms of similarities, there is a loss of liberty in many ways, with certain attitudes by the government creeping. There's several articles comparing what's happening right now in terms of the government in U.S. compared to what Perón did in Argentina. Perón being a very socialist, a very authoritarian-minded person. Those are the comparisons you would not like to have. You would like to avoid them as much as possible.
Now, when I started to read your book, I actually ordered your book earlier this year, but I started reading it in the past few days, really going through it. I was surprised at the beginning where you're talking, you're thanking people for helping you write it. And Matt Bracken helped you edit it.
Yes, Matt is a good friend and a great guy, and I'll always be in debt to his help. He
is a great guy. I had him on the show a couple weeks ago. Actually, I've had him twice on the program. And
his books are actually quite, I'd say that from most of the fiction that is out there in terms of of survivalism, which sometimes is very out there and not very realistic. Matt has done a great job in portraying how things could happen if they go south in U.S.
Oh yeah, with the gun confiscation thing in the
you're
first
seeing it
novel.
Right now, aren't you? In terms of the gun confiscation, how things degrade socially as well.
Yeah. So yeah, the Enemies, Foreign and Domestic, everybody, is a worthwhile novel to read. Now, what I was talking with him about a couple weeks ago is something that you kind of have an unorthodox view on, and that is the whole where should you live, if things really go south. A lot of people are saying get out of these big cities, get out of these big cities. You don't want to be around, heavily balkanized areas. You don't want to be around areas that, the food supply is reliant on a very complex system of delivery. Go ahead.
If you ask anyone in U.S. where it is they buy food, it's going to be pretty much the same. Everyone goes to Walmart or something similar along those lines.
Even in the country.
Exactly. So I think there's this huge fantasy that is, Hollywood has a lot of blame there as well, and TV shows that are very unrealistic. The idea that everyone in the country is self-reliant and extremely skillful, and everyone in the city is completely useless and incapable of taking care of themselves, and everyone's going to be running from the cities and attacking country folks.
Yeah.
It is not realistic. If you do this seriously, if you research historic events of how things go down when there's disasters, natural, man-made, economic disasters, that's not what happens. That's not what you have. Of course, advantages and disadvantages from living in the city, living in the outskirts. I think that it's a good compromise to live somewhere in between, so as to have the good things that you like of not living in the city, which I don't like myself. I wouldn't like to live in a place like New York or something like that. But I wouldn't want to be far away from all the good things that a major population area has to offer, like good education, health, jobs, for a change.
And I think that's part of the thing. People don't realize that if they really want to move way out to the boonies, they really want to go, they want to take their family out off some country road that's, 10 miles from the next house. It takes a lot to really be able to grow your own food, to really be able to even just provide security. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you live even on a huge parcel of land, and you point this out in your book, in Argentina, there were a lot of home invasions out there, in the countryside. People were very, unprepared or didn't realize that, the people who really were in need, could make it out to them. Am I right about that?
Again, it's a fantasy that people have because of the things they see on TV and such, or on movies. They think, I'm gonna be well protected by being out of sight, out of mind. The truth is, and this is something that I'm seeing here as well, in a very safe country, in a very safe place. It's another planet compared to what I'm used to, and still you see that the houses that get broken into, especially when people go on holidays. So, first of all, empty houses, favored by criminals, are the ones that are a little bit out there, a little bit out of sight. And that's the ideal place for a criminal to work with. He can approach a vehicle there. He notices if you are out on a trip or on holidays, and he has all the time in the world to go through all your stuff without fear of being detected.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the whole crime issue. One of the things that I highlighted in your book as I was going through it the other day was where you talk about the different types of crime that increases following a major economic crisis. And I highlighted where you were talking about rape and violent home invasions and things like that, and you say that you suppose that it's getting more and more common because there's an overall feeling that people can do whatever they want since, they won't get caught. The government infrastructure has been so damaged that there's no one, really there to investigate.
Yes, if you look at in Argentina, the figures are pretty bad. I think it was less than 2% of actual crimes get solved. So
Wow.
you're pretty much doing whatever it is you want without fear of being detained, being stopped. And the figures aren't that better in first world countries either. If you look at the figures of how many crimes get solved, how many perpetrators end up in jail, those are figures that are pretty revealing. In most cases, people don't pay for what they do. It's mostly a sensation of fear of committing a crime and having to pay consequences for that. When people start feeling that they can get away with lots of these things, crime starts getting worse. And besides that, you have the problem of the social problem of having people becoming more and more poor. The differences between those that have and those that don't, as those differences become greater, there is a hatred from those in the lower section of society towards those that have stuff. So it's not only that they rob you, they break into your house, they tie you up, they actually hate you for having all that stuff that they never had, or they are at least finding it very difficult to achieve.
Now, over here in the U.S., we have a so-called gun culture. You hear all these microcephalics in the media ripping on it, saying that, oh, it's so horrible. But there are many people here, especially even in these inner cities and in these suburbs, that really are terrified of guns, never had a gun. Even a place nearby where I used to live, there was a series of home invasions, and no one, even after the home invasions took place, at least when people were not in their house, it was, while they were on vacation.
Right.
They didn't, buy a firearm, learn how to use it. They just figured that the police would always protect them. Is there a similar mindset, or was there a similar mindset among people thinking that the government was just going to protect them from, the increase in crime? It doesn't matter. The state will still be there to pour their cereal for them, make sure that they, is that mindset, was that still prominent even after the,
there's still this anti-gun thing is even popular in places like Argentina as well. Even though people completely understand that the police cannot do anything to protect them, many still think that guns are evil, that guns are the problem. The stuff that you're fed directly to your head through the social media stuff, through the mainstream media, it's very powerful. People, they think the gun is a problem even though they're getting slaughtered on the streets like it happens in Argentina. Yes, it is. A lot of people do have that mindset. Now, there is a growing number of people that are awakening and realizing that you should have means to defend yourself. And unfortunately, one of the differences is that in Argentina and in South America in general, we don't have that gun culture that is so famous and made reference to in U.S. It's something that I believe you guys are very lucky to have, are very fortunate to have the Second Amendment, and it should be cherished and protected by all means, because it's a key factor to people's freedom, to individual freedom.
Well, I wish we had more Americans like you over here. One of the things I really like about your book is you talk about specific strategies. They're very specific. You get into things like evasive driving, fleeing areas, how to specifically, drive away from threats. You get into,
Right.
how to defend yourself with a knife specifically. All these different things. Those are just a couple examples. But you also talk about psychology. And people's minds really have to change after an economic collapse. They need to get rid of this normalcy bias that we all have. And you say kind of at the beginning of your book, and I'm assuming you're talking to men and women, that people need to man up, that they need to wash away the indoctrinated social behavior that's been drilled into them. Can you just talk a little bit about how the psychology of a person needs to change to a survival mindset from before and after an economic collapse?
Yes, as you well said, it's not, I use the word like man up, but it's both for women and guys. It's for me, it's the same thing. It's about getting rid of this idea of the way in which we should be that has been fed to us all our lives. You have to be nice, and nice people don't do certain things. Nice people don't have guns, don't have knives, don't know how to defend themselves. Nice people are very much hopeless. And that's not true. It's simply not true. You can be the nicest person alive and still be capable of defending yourself. And it's not just about defense. It's about all the problems that you face in general. And that may be losing your job. That may be like some of my family and friends have been dealing with these last few days. That may as well be spending Christmas without water, without power, and just rolling with that and accepting it as part of life, doing whatever it is you can so as to improve your situation. But if you get all upset and you get all worked up because of little things, when something like this happens and becomes more and more common in your life, it's really going to be affecting you. It was surprising the amount of people that kill themselves after a crisis.
Huh.
And that's the kind of thing that you will see in many places. After studying it, I've seen it happening in Greece. In many countries that have gone through something somewhat similar, people just cannot mentally deal with it. So I think it's very important to be capable, being more whenever we use the word self-reliance, be more self-reliant in all of these aspects of life.
So would you say then that an enormous component of survival in an economic collapse type of situation is more than just physically stockpiling gold, buying ammo, storing food, storing water? It's also about just the mindset and hardening yourself in some ways.
Some of the greatest survivalists that I know are people that really don't have that much food. They don't even know about this stuff that is the survival culture that, especially in U.S., thankfully it's pretty well known at least by a sector of society. But many of these guys, they don't even have stockpiles of food or anything like that. They just whenever there's a problem, they just try to fix it as quickly as possible. If they lose their jobs, they try creating their own jobs, and they even flourish during times where most of the people are struggling.
Wow, even you're saying the people who are not really prepared with they don't have the checklist beforehand and buying stuff up, but just because their personality, their mindset is of survival, they actually tend to do well in these situations.
The word would be cope. People that are very good at coping with problems, instead of getting depressed or being down because of them, they just say, okay, that's the situation. What is it that we have to do to fix it or to improve it? And they get onto it.
Mindset. That's interesting. Now, there are a lot of different things. There's a lot of great stuff in your book. I really appreciate the fact that you wrote it. When we're talking about dealing with other people after an economic collapse, I was reading the part of your book about barter. You kind of mentioned that a lot of people say that, precious metals, gold, silver, they're useless. They're just adornments. Was it pretty common after people stopped trading in pesos over in Argentina for people to rapidly, start using gold as a money substitute or as money?
Well, not really as a money substitute, but it was definitely a form of wealth that a lot of people ended up digging into, especially family jewelry, that sort of stuff. When people run out of money. They don't have any money in the bank. They don't have any cash left. They don't have any food on the table. One of the first things people do is just dig into the jewelry box and go sell the stuff that they have there. It's one of the quickest ways to criminals as well. Criminals, when they break into a place, they go looking for cash, guns, drugs in the medicine cabinet, maybe some Valium, some sort of stuff, and jewelry as well. That's or small electronics that they can flip quickly. That's the kind of thing criminals go for because they can quickly turn it into cash. It is. I don't see it as an investment having precious metals. I see it as as a time machine protected form of savings, of having some form of money that's going to be protected even if the currency in your country fully collapses.
So in Argentina, did people do more direct bartering where they said, I have this item, I'll trade you for that? Was that, did that really explode after the currency became basically useless?
Yeah, it wouldn't be useless, the word. It lost 60% of its value, so it basically kept, 40%, 30% of its value was basically keeping it. And people still like to have as much cash as possible. The problem was that you needed much more of it. So that was more of the issue rather than money being worthless. And people weren't burning money.
And you actually point this out in your book. A lot of people are saying, oh, this money will be worthless after the economic collapse. But the fact of the matter is, people are going to still want to have some cash on hand more than likely. It's
the word cash is king would describe it pretty well. But again, we go back to people thinking in these extremes, either thinking in extreme cases where money is completely useless all around the globe and people are out of their vault shelters and and using caps and such, bottle caps. People think of that. They fail to think in the more realistic scenarios, which have very little to do with that.
Right. So again, kind of going back to this issue of people need to really look at history as a lesson, not necessarily at fiction. People think it's going to be all like the Wesley Rawls novel, Patriots, where, it's a total no government around for many years, just highway looting, people living in these, well-established retreats.
I think of it as wishful thinking. Thinking that the government will just disappear and leave all of us alone, that's wishful thinking.
Oh, we only wish that would happen.
Exactly. It's not going to be that way. You will still have the government taxing you and attacking your income and your lifestyle. And at the same time, you will have the guy pointing a gun at you when you go back home from a hard day of work, which is paying you not enough. So it's it's not the ideal situation where like in Stephen King's novels where everyone dies and everything is left there for you to pick up, like no, or like in I Am Legend, you have the entire city for your own and you just pick whatever it is that you have. We only wish that our greatest problems was just shooting stupid zombies that don't know better than just rush at you.
Oh, man. Well, you mentioned the government. After an economic collapse, the government gets a lot more corrupt. They don't just, they're not like there to help people as much as they are to bilk them even more because, now they're dealing with a debt crisis. Back during the Great Depression, they had forced gold buybacks. People that don't even realize that FDR, confiscated gold basically.
Yes,
and
exactly.
that sort of thing happened in Argentina too. The government didn't just, they weren't like setting up, elaborate camps for people to come, take part in soup kitchens and things like that. They became even more of a problem than they already were, right?
Well, the government, I don't think that the government is per se evil on its own. I don't think it's people getting together and thinking, okay, how can we ruin these poor bastards' lives?
Right. They're good-intentioned people, which makes it...
I think that their good intention is, okay, if things are bad, we need more government so as to help everyone. Mm-hmm. And that more government means more weight being put on people's back. But they think they're going to be helping the greater... they think they're going to be helping the mass, helping society in general. Well, some people are going to be affected by it. We're going to be... doing it worse for some, but overall it's going to be better. And in that philosophy that they have, they end up doing rather the contrary and ruining it for a lot of us.
Interesting. Now, getting into some more specifics on just defense in general, not to switch topics rapidly on you here, but you're a pretty big firearms expert, but you've been training with them ever since you were a young person? Yeah,
I took my first defensive shooting class, which was 3 months long when I was 15 years old. Before leaving Argentina, I actually took my firearms instructor course. So yes, you could say I do know a little bit about firearms.
Now, what would you recommend to the average person here in America? You know, the gun laws are I guess, open relative to the rest of the world. What would you say is let's say, I know there's a lot of people out there that don't even have a gun in their house that are probably listening to this. What would you recommend how would they start their home defense strategy in this department? What would your recommendation be?
Well, for home defense, it's not only about the firearm. For home defense, having an alarm, having good locks, having a dog are things that are going to be more than likely turning criminals looking for easier targets than your own. So the firearm, I think it's important because it's the last line of defense that you have so as to protect your life and the life of your loved ones. At the same time, I realize that some people just are not meant to have a gun. They have a certain mindset that, if you don't believe in your life being more important than someone that's trying to take it away from you, then do everyone a favor and don't have a gun, because you're definitely not the person. Now, if you value your life more than the one of a criminal is probably thinking very little about taking it from you, I think that you do need a firearm. And thankfully in U.S., you still have the laws that allow you to have a gun. For someone that has no experience with firearms and is not looking at taking the amount of training that they actually need, I think that a revolver, 2-inch barrel revolver, is the best, is your best option. 38 Special, or 357 Magnum. 357 Magnum will of course fire 38 Special. I don't think that's the best firearm by any means. I think that's the best firearm for someone that's not going to be doing the minimum training but still wants to have a gun for self-defense. If you're going to be willing to put the necessary training that you should into knowing how to use a firearm for self-defense, just make it simple. Buy a Glock 9mm pistol, Glock 19, Glock 17, and get the training that you need. That would be my recommendation for people that are looking to do things as they should.
You also mentioned about knives, too, and how those can be useful. A lot of people think that a gun's going to save them in every circumstance, but I was actually watching a video, I think, that you did maybe a number of months ago, where you point out the fact that in even medium combat situations, medium range combat situations, most people, aren't, quick enough to draw a gun to where, maybe it's also good to have a little bit of basic, knife defense training too, right?
Well, the knife is awfully effective, and it has been used many times. I know of a couple of cases, even against guys that broke into a house with guns. You can kill someone with a knife even if he's armed. Actually, if you practice some of the force and force scenarios, you see that within the ranges that are most likely to take place of a gunfight, within 7 yards, if you know what you're doing with a knife, the guy with a gun has actually very little chance of making it out alive. That's basically what the Twiller drill shows us, that within the 7 yards, the 25 feet range, you're pretty much out of luck if you haven't drawn already.
Yeah,
the knife never jams, never runs out of bullets, and especially one that is, 5, 6 inches. Even a common chef knife, like the one everyone has in their kitchen. I mean, that's an awfully effective weapon at close range.
Interesting. That's a lot of people probably don't realize that. That's really good stuff, and I was actually really happy that you put that out there for people to think about. Now, getting back to the home defense thing, and incorporating this whole psychology theme, I remember you also recently did a critique of another person who was writing, survivalist literature. I forgot who it was. And he was saying that, maybe it's best to, if you live in a more crowded neighborhood, to turn off all your lights and make it look like the house is abandoned. Can you go into why that's a bad idea? Why it's best to, make it seem or have the appearance, even when you're not there, that you have, a lot of people in the house, you have all the lights on, things like that. I mean, these are things that these are mistakes people are going to make, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a really bad idea, and I suppose it's again wrong information. Think of it yourself. If you're a criminal and you're looking to break into a house to steal stuff, would you break into a house that has people, or would you break into an empty house?
An empty house, probably.
An empty
path of least resistance. I would like to get
shot myself, so I would try to break into an empty house. I would actually approach, look, peek through the window, try to see if I see nice stuff to steal. Especially try to see if there's someone inside the house. You know, if the house is empty, maybe you go through the backyard, you break a window, you break your way in. But if there's people inside, it takes a different kind of criminal to break into a house knowing there's people inside. It's a more dangerous type of person. It's someone that in that case, you effectively need a weapon to defend yourself, and you need to have some training so as to use it properly, and you need to have it within reach. That's also important. In that case, I know of people that were just having dinner, and all of a sudden they hear a loud bang, and someone kicks their door in, and they just burst their way in. You just have a couple of seconds. You don't have minutes to go to a gun safe, open it. The gun has to be with you at all times to be able to deal with something like that. So if crime gets to that point where it's becoming common occurrence, people just kicking doors down and breaking in with people inside, you definitely need to keep your weapon with you. It is basic common sense. Criminals don't want to break into houses. Most criminals will prefer to go into a house that is empty. So yes, leave the lights on when you're away. Have some of those gadgets that turn lights on their own randomly if you're going to be leaving for a few days. That's also a good idea.
So what you said's very interesting to me. Not that I didn't know it beforehand, but I know that a lot of people don't realize it. So when the economic crisis in Argentina got bad, for your average family, was there a sense that, maybe someone had to, always be up in the house, someone had to really be watching, everybody had to be armed? I mean, how did that sort of change amongst a lot of the people you knew? Just, I don't know, guard, I'm trying to figure out how to word this, but you know where I'm going,
yes,
how I'm saying?
Yes, this idea that you always have to be in guard, many people just take a philosophical approach of whatever it is will be, and let God deal with it. In most cases, I'd say people have this approach of just going into denial. That would be the word. Now, of the people that are my friends that are more like-minded, should I say, the people from my gun club that took the classes with me and such, yes, the idea was that you were armed at all times. You even went to the bathroom with your gun. You had your weapon with you at all times. And that's one of the things that in Argentina, because of the crime problem being so big, many of the things that are sometimes theory in other places, like in U.S., are actually put to a test every once in a while. Of the friends of mine that took firearms training, many of them actually had to use it to defend their lives and ended up killing criminals. And a friend of mine, actually, he died because he didn't have his gun with him when something like this happened. During a break-in in his house, his carry permit had expired, and he didn't carry his gun with him during that week. And he was unfortunate enough that, unfortunately, during those days, he got attacked and he got killed. And there's always this feeling you have of, damn, what it would have been like if he had been armed. Knowing he was a good shooter, knowing he was pretty proficient with his gun, he participated in action shooting tournaments. There's always that feeling that of regret of if only he had his gun with him when he needed it.
Unbelievable. So this is a serious thing. People need to not only have the guns, they have to be trained to use them, and they have to actually use them. They have to actually carry them. It's not, the rainbows and sunshine, lock it up in a safe that takes 5 minutes to open. It's always being prepared, as the Boy Scouts would say.
And it's when crime reaches that level, yes, that's the way it is. And it's not even about having just any gun. One of the things gun guys say is rule number 1: have a gun. I don't know if you heard that before. It's
Sure.
Rule number 1: have a gun. It's not even that. It's not just have a gun. Any little thing you think. It's having the gun you've mastered and know how to shoot properly and know you can count with. So it's not about going to a firearms class with a Glock 17, which is nice and has good magazine capacity and accuracy and such, and then pocket carrying a mouse gun that you would be having problems working with when things get bad. It's about carrying that gun that you use for training and have mastered its use.
All right, let's talk a little bit on a larger level because I was thinking a little bit about this. When you are living in a suburban or even an urban community, you have neighbors that you can trust. Is there a lot of benefit in maybe, forming groups with them where you're preparing together, you're coming up with plans? I mean, what are the plus and minuses of that sort of arrangement in your mind, and what, advice can you give to people that are thinking about reaching out to some of the people in their area to, prepare for a potential economic collapse?
I think that first of all, you have to be a good neighbor in general. One of the first things I did when I moved here was I went across the street and told, the nice old lady that lives across my street, we just moved in. You can count on me at all times. If you have any problem at all, just let me know and I'll help any way I can. And that's the kind of thing people appreciate. That's the kind of thing people keep in mind. And you start becoming a good neighbor. You know what I mean? People know you're a good guy. They can count on you. Eventually, you start approaching them in different things. I don't think that you should go. Your first conversation shouldn't be, "Hey, I'm a gun nut. I'm a survivalist, and I want to form a neighborhood watch. So let's get all our guns." Little by little, you start approaching people. I think that keeping your mouth shut is also very important, especially about having weapons, having firearms and such. It's the kind of thing that a lot of people just, as we were talking about before, lots of people just don't go for that. And they will think of you worse because of it. So you shouldn't waste your time with that people, and you shouldn't get on the wrong side either. So it's a slow process of getting to know your neighbors, people in your community. In many cases, people are just not all that into it. They're not, maybe they like guns, they like going shooting, but they're not into more serious defensive things. So I think that it takes a little bit of time to get to know the people in your neighborhood, and little by little start talking about these topics.
They talk a lot on these internet boards, at least the Americans do, about OPSEC, operational security, about keeping things on the down low. There seems to be, I don't want to call it paranoia because I think it's good paranoia that after any sort of major disaster, we just had Hurricane Sandy, and we hear stories of how, unprepared neighbors or even people that made fun of the, preppers before the collapse, they were the first ones to come knocking and asking for a handout. I mean, was there a similar dynamic in Argentina, and what advice can you give to people for dealing with their neighbors?
Yeah, I generally kept things to myself, even especially with just neighbors are not always your best friends, your best buds. So I kept a pretty low profile in general. Being nice and all, but not saying, yes, I have a ton of guns, I have food, if there's any problems, come looking for me. I only had one person who asked for a gun that I just couldn't give it to him because I knew that it was an extremely bad idea. In general, you have to avoid those situations like the plague. You don't want someone knocking on your door asking for a gun because, you will not be able to give it to him. It's if the person does not have a gun already, then he does not know how to use it. That's a given. You cannot just give a Glock to someone and say, okay, here you go, my friend. He's going to be shooting himself. He's going to be shooting the wrong person. If the person hasn't got the basic training that any gun owner will have, then it's a bad idea to hand over. And again, you were talking about the forums and such. People think of having tons of guns so as to arming the community. Are you going to be handing over a gun to someone that doesn't even own one already?
Yeah.
What kind of security is that person going to be providing for himself or for others?
Probably be more dangerous than it would be helpful.
In fact, I mean, guns are not toys. We all know that, and responsible gun owners are very. A gun in the hands of a responsible gun owner is extremely safe, no doubt about that. But handing over a gun to someone that has no clue of how to use it, it's an awful bad idea. And in that case, I think it's probably more harm than good.
Okay, so you want to start off by being a good neighbor, number one, in good times, and then maybe
shooting. If you have neighbors that you think could be more like-minded, offer them going shooting one day. I've taken people to shoot for the first time so many times. In Argentina, I took people shooting for the first time in their lives countless times. Some of them eventually ended up buying their guns, ended up taking the classes, knowing how to shoot their guns. That's what you should be doing, not thinking of arming the nutcase that lives across the street, which you barely talk to.
Right. So, it's about being a good neighbor and maybe approaching the like-minded ones or the ones who seem like it, developing a slow relationship rather than, forming a militia, something like that. Something realistic.
There's nothing wrong with a gun militia, but today, most neighbors, if the first conversation you have in the neighborhood in the neighborhood get together is let's form a group to shoot looters and zombies, you're gonna be getting the wrong impression out there.
Well, I think this is a good interview in the things that we're talking about because you are an expert in this area. You've lived through it. And I think most of the preparing is also shedding the fictional stuff, shedding the things that are least likely to happen, total anarchy, things like that. I mean, not that those things, it's impossible those things could happen, but just practical. There have been countless economic depressions around the world that we can look at. And those are really the best teachers for what's likely to happen, right?
Exactly. There's nothing wrong. I mean, I watch every possible zombie post-apocalyptic movie there is. I have I love Fallout games. I play them all. I have Fallout Las Vegas, which I like a lot. Now, you have to understand the difference. It's extremely different. And same with fiction. In Matt Bracken's book, I think it's one of the best books in how it's been portraying the possible scenario. Lights Out is also pretty good. I like it a lot too. But in general, besides those exceptions, in general, it's really not a manual on how to prepare for a disaster of any kind. I did a video on YouTube showing a book that is called 501 Most Devastating Disasters. That's where you actually gain the knowledge from historic events, from historic disasters that have happened in the past. When you realize how things go down in those cases, you have a much realistic idea of how things will go down in the future.
So it's the mindset, it's the psychology, hardening yourself, and thinking rationally about what is most likely to happen, looking at history as a lesson, not necessarily looking at these fictional accounts, although some, like you mentioned, Matt Bracken's novels, which I'm halfway through right now, things like that are more realistic, and just, getting your family on board. How?
Yes.
One of the questions I really did, I want to let you finish whatever you're about to say, though. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was about to say, there are also a lot of people who are listening to you and they're saying, you make a lot of sense. Maybe I really need to start, preparing, taking this a little bit more seriously. How would you advise these people on convincing their spouses, convincing, maybe their older kids, convincing their family members in their extended family? How would you help them to, make the case for why people need to prepare? Is this something that you or your friends have gone through in your own family where people look at you crazy if you're, a survivalist? I mean, here in the American media, the term survivalist is always used in a denigrating fashion.
Yes.
Yeah, it's used to denigrate people,
Yeah, survivalist has that 70s connotation or 60s connotation of a guy in the bunker preparing for a Cold War. Prepper, I don't think it's much better either. I mean, lots of guys that define themselves as preppers are not people I would want to be close to if things go wrong. I like modern survival, a modern survival mindset. I think that it adapts to at least to what the beliefs I have, which is more practical and less nutty.
Yeah.
Should I say? You have to do your thing. About family, friends, you cannot go convincing everyone about your opinions and your view of the world in general. I mean, my wife, she's not Jane Prepper or anything like that. She's a very normal lawyer, stay-at-home mom now.
Oh, a normal lawyer. There's normal lawyers out there now.
Yeah, she's family law in her case, which is a little bit less evil. But, I liked shooting from an early age. I just simply didn't conceive the idea of not having a weapon for self-defense in my house. That's something that it does not compute with me. And my wife, she was not into the idea of guns. She said, I don't like guns. She was the kind of person that says, I don't like guns.
Yeah.
And that's fine. You don't have to like them, but you're not going to be making me live in a house without guns and having my family protected, because that's my responsibility.
Right.
Yes. So you take her shooting so at least have a basic idea of what weapon handling is like. Now, there's a little anecdote that you might find interesting. Even though she said she didn't like guns and such, I said, okay, at least know the basic operation of how to using it.
Yeah.
And she listened to me and all that and such. One day I went out to work, and when I came back, I saw my Glock pistol on the table. And I said, what happened? Well, someone had...
Was she mad at you or no?
No. Apparently someone had tried to open the door, the main gate. We had like the door and a storm grating door, metal. Someone had tried to open that, and she of course got scared, and like any scared person would do inside a house, thinking there's someone trying to break in, she went looking for the gun. So I think that was a point where she realized how important it is to at least have a last line of defense in case something like that happens.
Interesting. I was actually just joking. I was saying she didn't bring it out for you when you got home. No. Okay, I know that we've been talking for a while. When you look at the United States, kind of as a way to wrap up, what would your advice be to the average person over here who's maybe like-minded as you? If you had to give them one piece of advice, what would it be?
One piece of advice. I think that in the coming years, people are going to be seeing things get much worse, and people in general are going to be getting through it as we always do. I think that it's very important in terms of self-defense. I think it's important for anyone that considers himself somewhat like-minded, go buy a Glock, get a concealed carry permit if you can in your state, and learn how to shoot it. Take classes with someone that knows proper gun handling for defensive purposes. Then, of course, there's lots of things that you should be doing, having a stockpile of food, 3-6 months. It's all going to be used eventually, nonetheless, because we all eat. So
yeah.
So there's no point in not having it. Having at least a couple of weeks of water at home, which may not be easy, but when I was living in a condo, I would have little soda bottles in different places so as to have water. Water is extremely underrated. People don't realize how basic it is. We take it for granted because you just turn the faucet and you have water there. Not having water is much worse than not having power, by all means. And little by little, building up a supply of cash, of emergency funds, which you can use to buy whatever supply you missed in your preparations. Also important, I think, is having what it's called a basic everyday carry. You know, in the states where you can actually have it, have your weapon with you at all times, every single day. Have a knife, a multi-tool, a flashlight, the kind of things that people like us have on our pockets every single day. I think they eventually come in handy when there's problems.
Fernando Aguirre, aka FerFAL, is my guest. Fernando, thanks for being with me. I really appreciate your time this evening. I really want to encourage everybody to go to cbronson.com. I linked up his blog, website, and also where you can buy his book. I'm really enjoying going through it. It's very practical. He gives you the specifics. It's not a bunch of hypotheticals. He's lived through it, so I really want to encourage people to go out there and pick it up. Well, thanks again for being with me tonight, and hopefully maybe sometime we can have you on again.
Well, Chris, it was great talking with you. You're great at this, good at asking the questions, the right ones, and it was great talking with you. So yes, whenever you want, we can do this again.
All right. Have a good one. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.